Hi, I'm Lindsey Taylor-Guthartz, and I thought I'd talk a little bit today about Yom Kippur, especially the eve of Yom Kippur, and the Piyyutim, the liturgical poems, or just plain poems, that we say on that night as part of the service. Now, a lot of people get very bored by Piyyutim. They're elaborate, the Hebrew is difficult to understand, and many people just feel that that part of the service just goes on and on forever. So I thought it would be a good idea to look at what Piyyutim are, what they're about, and then to discuss a little set of them that appear on the evening of Yom Kippur, many of which have nice tunes. So you might know the tune if you don't actually know the words. And I'm hoping that this might actually help contribute to your Yom Kippur experience. What about Piyyutim in general? Well, they're quite a late development in Judaism, maybe the 3rd, 4th, 5th century CE, something like that. We don't know a lot about their origin, but they seem to have started spontaneously as people added their own poetic additions to the prayers. Don't forget there were no Sidurim back then. You had a prayer leader, and though they had to stick to certain bits of the liturgy, they were allowed to make up extra bits if they wanted to. Gradually, these Piyyutim got written down, and then they got fixed or fossilized, and that's what we've got now. So some were written by famous poets. Others, like 3 of the 4 that I'm going to talk about, don't actually have a known author, which usually means they're quite early. And what were they meant to do? These poems were meant to act as meditations, really, as places to think about the themes of that day, to dwell on them, to think about biblical references to them. And they were really seen as opportunities to link our prayers and the mood of the day to biblical stories and ideas and various metaphors and imagined themes that we find elsewhere in rabbinic literature, in Midrash and elsewhere. And on Yom Kippur evening, we have a sequence of 4 of them, and they are framed by the Kel Male Rachamim paragraph. That I'm not going to discuss today, just to say briefly, it's about repeated calls to God to have mercy on us. We appeal to God's endless mercy and forgiveness. And perhaps at every stage of this tussle between God's tendency to judge us and God's tendency to forgive us, which is one of the themes of Yom Kippur, perhaps at every stage, El Male Rachamim is used as a sort of punctuating prayer. So it frames the sequence of 4 Piyyutim that I am going to discuss, and it comes at the beginning and at the end, and depending on your exact version of the Machzor, it may come between some of these poems as well. So let's get down to looking at the poems, and I'm going to do a bit of sharing of screen so that you can see some of the text. So let's see if I can get that up. There we are. The first one's called Ya'aleh, because its first word is Ya'aleh. This is usually how we refer to Piyyutim. And like many Piyyutim, it has all sorts of word games and acrostics. And here you can actually see in the Hebrew, we've got Tav, Shin, Resh. Then we go to Kuf, Sadi, Pei. It's a backwards acrostic. It's the Hebrew alphabet in reverse, and the most important word of each phrase starts with one of the letters in sequence. And most Piyyutim, not all, but most Piyyutim have some sort of acrostic. Sometimes it's a simple Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, and each line starts with one of those letters. Sometimes there are fancy games. Sometimes there are multiple acrostics, 2 or 3 going on at the same time. This one's just a good plain backwards one. And that can be one of the fun things to look for if your Hebrew is up to it, is finding where the acrostic is in your Piyyut. It's a way of remembering it, but it's also a way of making it more interesting and challenging to the poet. I've underlined the corresponding words here. They're, of course, not alphabetical in English. I'm sorry about that. My translation skills aren't that good. But you can see how they appear. Let our supplication, Tachanunenu, rise to you from the evening, and may our cry, Shabbatenu, come before you from the morning, and let our prayer, Rinunenu, appear before you by the evening. And this pattern goes on throughout for about 8 stanzas here. We'll just read the second one in English. Let our voice rise to you from the evening, and may our justification come before you from the morning, and let our redemption appear before you by the evening. And all the stanzas have that sort of pattern, a bit like a countdown, really, given the fact it's a reverse acrostic. So that sums up Yom Kippur pretty well. We are counting down towards a liftoff in our relationship with God. And the central theme of the Piyyut matches that as well. We've got the three phrases of each line, 1, 2, 3, and they are matched by different times on Yom Kippur. The evening, when we're actually saying this poem, the morning, tomorrow morning, the morning of Yom Kippur, and then the Yom Kippur end, the gradual move towards twilight, where the atmosphere gets very intense indeed. So we have evening, morning, the next evening, and that goes all the way through. The words that start with the letters of the Hebrew alphabet are mostly to do with prayer or salvation, supplication, cry, prayer, voice, justification, redemption. And they get more and more intense throughout the poem, just as the mood of Yom Kippur intensifies during the day. And by the next to last line, we're asking that God hear us knocking at the door of heaven, simultaneously rejoicing in the forgiveness we anticipate and begging for that forgiveness too. The very last line, however, I just want to look at, that goes back to simplicity. It's finished the acrostic and it actually repeats the letter Aleph 3 times. En katenu, elecha, elenu. Let our prayer, en katenu, rise to you from the evening, and may we come to you, elecha, in the morning. May you appear to us by elenu, by evening. So there we have the essence of Yom Kippur. We pray, we hope to come into the presence of God, and we hope that God will reveal God's self to us by the end of Yom Kippur in forgiveness and mercy. So you could say this Piyyut, Ya'aleh, maps out the journey of Yom Kippur for us as we travel from evening to evening, coming closer and closer until cleansed and forgiven, we finally reach God, who is symbolized, of course, by the letter Aleph that we have repeated 3 times in this last line. Okay, so that's the first one, the journey of Yom Kippur, resting at the end in the presence of God. Let's move on to our next one in our sequence of 4, Salachna Ashamot, forgive the sins. And once again, we have an acrostic running through the entire Piyyut, 1 letter per line. Here it's actually printed in 2 lines. We've got Ashamot, Banechan, and we've got Giulim, Degulecha. And again, that's just an acrostic that goes from Aleph to Bet. It's the right way around here. But the theme of the Piyyut is very different from the first one. Here, the focus is on a very intense relationship between the Jewish people and God, rather than on our journey to God. And we describe ourselves in negative and positive terms as we talk to God. Let's just have a look at the first 2 lines to get a bit of a flavor of it. Please pardon the sins and failings of your people. At the iniquity of your children, do not be angered. Please pardon their contempt. Let them live from your life source. Forgive the iniquity of your flag bearers, that's us, and spare us according to your word. So again, you can see a very simple pattern. Each line starts, Salachna, please pardon, asks God, or specifies exactly what it is we want God to pardon, and then asks God again in a sort of expansion, not to be cross with us, to do something positive for us. Okay, so we describe ourselves throughout this poem in positive and negative terms. We are your children. We are also your nation. We also describe ourselves as those who kneel and prostrate themselves before you. But we also include some negative terms. We talk about the wicked of your people. And we're conscious that we're a mixed bag in this poem. But also, we may be a mixed bag, but we are yours. We belong to God, your children, your flag bearers. So we tell God what we would like God to do. Don't let your anger burn. Don't be angered. Don't punish us in any way. Do wipe out our sin. Do rebuild your temple. Do have pity on your people from your heavens. So throughout this Piyyut, we tell God that we know we're not perfect, but that we trust in our special relationship with God, and we trust in God's long commitment to us as a people. And as so often in our prayers, we remind both God and ourselves of this long, long love affair between God and the Jewish people. And we beg God to continue the pattern of mercy that we know from the past, from the Exodus from Egypt, from the time in the desert, and throughout history. So here we have this poem that focuses on the relationship between the Jewish people and God, and the trust that has built up over the centuries in that relationship. Let's move on to the third poem, Omnam Ken. You may know this to a bouncy tune, which is completely unsuited to the words, but a lot of fun to sing. And here again, and here I've remembered to put it in red, you can see yet another acrostic. Omnam Ken, Yetza Sochen, Banu, Bach, Lahatzedek, Rav Tzedek, Va'anenu, Salachti. And the pattern here again is quite clear. Phrase 1, phrase 2, phrase 3, answer us, I have forgiven you. And each one ends with that line, I have forgiven you. Let's just look at it in the English. Though the Yetzer Hara, our bad inclination, controls us, we look to you, who are full of justice, to justify us. Answer us by saying, Salachti, I've forgiven you. Save us from the prosecutor and invalidate his charges. Beloved God, roar aloud and shout out, Salachti, I have forgiven you. Be silent, prosecutor. Let the defense counsel take his stand. May God back him up and say, Salachti, I have forgiven you. And we go on for many, many more verses. I've just brought these 3. And you can see here we've got a completely different situation. We have a courtroom scene, an imagined trial where the Jewish people are put on trial for their various sins and offenses, where God is the judge. And this is the song we sing about that trial. We beg God to save us from the prosecutor. We beg God to judge us favorably. And we have a little miniature scenario here going on. Each double line presents this. We plead with God to forgive us and to pronounce that word Salachti, as he did very long ago after we messed up in the little matter of the golden calf. So once again, we're modeling what we would like God to do. And we can see this progression right the way through. We have the trial, we have the judge, we have the prosecutor, we have the defender, and particularly the defender, the senegar. Be silent, prosecutor, let the defense counsel take his stand. And again, we have all the appurtenances of a divine courtroom. We imagine the proceedings, we describe what we want to happen, and we constantly remind God that he's managed to forgive us before, so why not this time? We want a replay. So moving on from this poem, which puts us in the courtroom and imagines us very vividly there, we come to the last in the sequence, Kihine. Again, there are lots of lovely tunes to this one. And once again, this is very, very different. We don't seem to have an acrostic here, but we've got a repetitive pattern linked to craftsmen of the ancient world, potters, masons, stonecutters, embroiderers, all sorts of people, people working glass. And in each situation, we imagine that God is the master craftsman and we are his product. So each verse compares us to that craft material, clay, stone, an axe, the ship's wheel, glass, silver. And it points out that God shapes our destinies and fates. God is the craftsman who controls all those things. And a different power of God is described in each verse. So we'll start off looking at this. We'll just read the first line in Hebrew. Ki hinei kachomer b'yad hayotzer. Look like clay in the hand of the potter who can spread it out. Bitzuto marchiv ubitzuto mekatzer. Or he can spread it out, or he can push it together. Ken anachnu b'yadcha. That's what we are like in your hand, O God. Chesed notzeh, you, God, who are full of kindness. Labrit habet, look at the covenant you made with us. Va'al tefed layetzer, and don't listen to the accuser. Or maybe it's yetzer in the sense of our evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara who has pushed us on to bad deeds. And you can see the pattern in the next verse. Look, like stone in the hand of the mason, who can hold it or smash it. We are like that in your hand, God. You who make people live and make them die. Look at our covenant with you and don't listen to our evil inclination. And each verse repositions us in a different craft, a different place, that we are at God's mercy, and asks God again to look to that covenant and not to condemn us. So that crafts imagery and the metaphors used in this piyut would have been very, very familiar to the people who heard it for the first time more than 1,000 years ago. We may not be quite so familiar with some of these crafts, but this would have been things people saw on the streets. So these would have been vivid and real images for them. And the piyut uses these individual images and everyday images to make us think about God's power over us and our own lack of power. When we realize it's not an equal relationship, all we can do is to appeal to God to remember that covenant, that Brit that he made with our ancestors, to be our God, and that we would be his people. And we can just beg him to ignore our personal sins and failings. So we've done a little journey through 4 Piyyutim for the evening of Yom Kippur. And we could suggest that those 4 are linked together in a sequence, in a progression, in a journey of their own. We start with the first one, Ya'aleh, which maps out that journey we're going to take on Yom Kippur as we travel from evening to morning, back to evening with the Ne'ilah service, coming closer and closer and closer till we hope we are forgiven by God and we finally reach God, who is symbolized by the letter Aleph, with which that piyut ends 3 times. We then move on to Salachna, where we request forgiveness and we admit that we have messed up big time. And then we go via Omnamken, which provides all sorts of reasons for us to be forgiven and almost encourages or pushes God in the direction of forgiving us. And finally, we end with Ki Hine, which says, okay, God, you are the one with the power, it's your decision. But it begs him to focus on our long-lasting relationship, rather than paying attention to what could be translated either as the counter-accusations of the heavenly accuser, or possibly our own inclination to mess up our relationship with God. So I hope that will help you on your personal journey through Yom Kippur this year. I hope we all have a successful journey from a rather unsatisfactory state of relationship with God to a more satisfactory one, closer and closer till we do feel that we have re-established that link and we can face the rigors of another year. Shana Tova, Gama Chatima Tova.